Good morning. It is 7:39 a.m. on Sunday, July 5th, 2020. I'm Christiana Ellis, and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. Because it is Sunday, I'm continuing my rewatch of The Legend of Korra with Book 2, Episode 2, The Southern Lights. So, in this episode, we have a little bit of uh, Oona Locke almost seeming like maybe he's a good guy after all, sort of. Um, just in order to kind of uh, nudge Korra along into continuing his plan. I feel like if I have one complaint about this storyline as depicted so far, it's really just that I said this last week, it still feels maybe a little bit too similar to the whole bit with Tarlok and Korra last season, where we have someone who's being, like we as the audience have so many huge red flags for what Oona Locke's whole deal is. And it's a little bit frustrating to have Korra just miss those obliviously and proceed to keep doing what he's saying, disregarding the advice of the other people who, we've come to expect to give good advice. But, it is a little bit complicated. I feel still like when I reflect back on the whole storyline, and I'm not going to spoil the rest of this season exactly, but, uh, you know, I'm not going to get into all that detail. I do still kind of like the idea of a character who is not good, but it's more about their tactics than their ultimate goal. Oh, it's complicated. The idea that the ideas that he uses to manipulate Korra are not bad ones, right? That's the key. And so I feel like that's interesting. And so the question then becomes, how long and how thoroughly can he gaslight her about what his real intentions are? And how much will she be willing to overlook of indications that that's happening in order to pursue what does seem like an actual reasonable and admirable goal? Well, I don't know. I guess we'll watch and see, right? So as we begin this episode, Korra, we last saw her telling Tenzin that she is no longer going to be studying under him, and instead she's going to study how to do spirit bending under Oona Locke. So she reports for training this time, but the first step, according to him, is to travel to the South Pole and open the spirit portal there. But it will be very dangerous. And so lots of other people are coming, including Mako and Bolin and Oona Locke's twin kids, and then, of course, Tonrak, Korra's father. When he shows up, though, he's not welcome. In particular, Oona Locke says that he's going to be, not merely unhelpful, but a hindrance because of course, of his history, which we have not been told yet, and Korra doesn't know. But he insists on coming along anyway. And it's not clear why everyone else is there. I mean, they're kind of coming to support Korra, but, Oona Locke doesn't seem to feel strongly about them. But of course, what we can look at, from a mature, sophisticated standpoint is that, Tonrak is the one that actually knows things about Oona Locke and could maybe warn Korra about some of those things, even though I think another maybe minor complaint about the storytelling here is just that it feels like the people trying to warn Korra about Oona Locke are doing so ineffectively. So this reveal that they had been lying to her all along about why she needed to stay at the South Pole, not great. The idea that they had been keeping the truth from her all along about why her father was in the Southern Pole at all. Just like it keeps undermining their credibility at the very moment that they're trying to tell her, Oona Locke is not what you think he is. But that's where they're finding the consequences to their own actions. There is that, like, how are they supposed to be able to persuade her that Oona Locke's not what he says he is when they she's learning that that's also true of them, right? I guess less so about Tenzin. Tenzin was still involved in this idea that to keep her, but like all of those things were kept from her for understandable reasons. Understandable, if not entirely defendable, right? But of course, it's also true that Korra is pretty headstrong, and she is very much inclined to listen to the person who is telling her what she wants to hear rather than the hard truth. That's just who Korra is at this point in the story. We might wish that it was different, but that's what we got. So this is all told in parallel with Tenzin and company arriving at the Southern Air Temple on their own tour. And based on the last episode, we wouldn't necessarily have assumed that we still had a lot of stake in the story still for them, other than reuniting with Korra at some point. But we see in this episode that we're setting up a couple of themes, one of which more directly connects to Korra, and the other is, is a more indirect relationship. But so one of those things is we specifically make explicit, in case anyone hadn't realized this already, that Tenzin's brother and sister, Bumi and Kaya, are not airbenders. And in this episode, we begin really establishing that there's a little bit of a family tension there. Not that they wish they were airbenders, but that the fact they're not might have been seen as a disappointment. And so, in particular, some of the other people who, the monks who are running the Southern Air Temple now, I feel like I feel like the story maybe could have used a little bit more information on, like, who are those people, right? Because they're obviously not the original air nomads. They might have just been volunteers, people who are willing to come and try to, restart this whole thing. I mean, and that could be great, but it would have been nice to hear a bit more about that. But in any event, we have the one lady say, like, she didn't even know Tenzin had a brother and sister, and then is excited. Oh, more airbenders? No, you're not airbenders? I'm so sorry. Like they must be devastated that they're not airbenders. So we are beginning to establish a little bit of a tension there between those siblings, and also by implication, a question of how did Aang feel about that? Like, obviously there is a strong drive from his perspective to say, if he's the last airbender, but with his children, he could potentially begin a new generation of airbenders, but then has 3 kids and only one of them is an airbender. That starts to be like a lot of pressure, right? So, we'll explore that more, obviously. But in the meantime, we also have Tenzin's kids who are doing their traditional sibling squabble, bickering sort of thing. But we focus more on Jinora, who is the eldest of the 3, who is fascinated by the different statues of the avatars. And I will say, I feel like it's kind of neat having, revisiting some of these locations that Aang visited, with these new characters. And, so in particular, what we see from Jinora's perspective is that as she's admiring the statue of Aang, she senses something, movement behind her. And then later, when she can't sleep, she finds a mysterious, different statue that looks like it's maybe also an Avatar statue, but it's different somehow. What's going on there? And then, of course, it lights up with energy in parallel with when Korra opens the portal. So that's all we really get there, but it's certainly enough to tell us that that plot line is also relevant. But in the meantime, obviously, we have Korra heading towards the South Pole. We learn that there's the Everstorm that is swirling around there, and we're told that it's because the spirits are angry about the portal being closed. By comparison, we're told that the northern lights in the North Pole are because the spirits are in harmony there, but there's no southern lights here because the spirits aren't in harmony. And they are attacked by spirits, and Oona Locke says it's because Tonraq is there. And that's when we learn the truth about Tonraq, which is, I mean, it's a legitimate secret that does raise serious questions about, maybe it is true. Maybe the spirits are mad because he's there, because we learn that when he was a young and impetuous warrior, he pursued some barbarians that had attacked the city into a sacred forest, and in capturing them, he destroyed the forest and led to angry spirits attacking the city. And so he was banished. The kid who would have been the chief being banished in favor of, Oona Locke. And so I feel like there's a little bit, it's a trick of sorts to give the dialogue where we have to just explain something on the nose with dialogue given to the comic support character. So you almost feel like Bolin is only in this episode to provide comic relief, what with his silly snowsuit and, driving the twins around in the sidecar of his snowmobile. But at this point where he's like, oh, so you're going to be the chief, but then because you were banished, you're the chief. I can see why you guys have so much tension. It's like, okay, yeah, we got it. But, at Korra's insistence, Tonraq does leave, and the spirit attacks do seem to, to calm. Is there more to this? Almost certainly, because we've been given big red flags that Oona Locke is the bad guy. So the things that he's saying are potentially suspicious. But eventually, Korra does go in to this sacred site, braves the Everstorm, braves dark spirits trying to stop her. Although I feel like it might be a reasonable question for Korra to have asked, why are the spirits trying to stop her? I mean, they're dark spirits, which are angry, who have been attacking. But if they're angry because the portal's closed, why would they try to stop her from opening it? That's a question that Korra might have occurred to Korra if she was the sort of person who thought about these things. But then again, we can understand also that she believes she is now studying under the person who can explain these things to her, and he said that this is what needed to happen. So, yeah. But so she goes in, and it takes going into the Avatar state, but she manages to open the portal, which I think this is where some of the season does creak a little bit under the strain of some of what they want, because it's not clear why. It's like, okay, so we open the portal, but what does that actually mean? Well, I guess spirits can do a thing. It's a little bit vague and unclear, but I mean, I guess to some extent that's by design, but it's still frustrating as a viewer. But in this episode, we're treated to a lot of stuff that is maybe saying, okay, well, maybe we were wrong about Oona Locke. maybe he's got a point. He told Korra what to do, and now things do seem to have been calmed. Even Tonrock, who is on his way back to the city, sees that the Southern Lights start up and says, "Oh, hey, good for her." But then we arrive back at the city, and Korra sees that Oona Locke's Northern Water Tribe fleet has arrived in the city, and he says, "Well, opening the portal is not enough to correct the spiritual decay from the South Pole." So, like, oh, right, okay, yeah, we'll see. And I think that a big amount of the frustration from a lot of people with this arc of the story is just the frustration that, especially after the whole bit with Korra and Tarlok last season, we wish that she was not so prone to manipulation from Oona Locke types. Oh well. In the meantime, next week for episode 3, we'll talk about Civil Wars Part 1. And in the meantime, I'll talk to you all tomorrow for 5 more minutes.